Welcome, Doug Capra.
Okay, I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint. Let's see if we can get it. Let's see. Share screen. Share. Is it up? Do you have it?
Yes.
All right. Okay. All right. You have the whole screen up now?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Now here we go. This, and by the way, you can see access to my website. I'll talk more about that later, but that little item in the middle, you can put your camera, your small phone camera on it and get access to the website. This presentation is a condensed version of a much longer chapter available on my rockwellkentjournal.blogspot.com website. It's about Kent's 1918-1919 Alaska trip. Now that uses the letters and other sources to unlock the turbulent genesis of Rockwell Kent's art and the book Wilderness. For those who want much more detail on the website, you'll find the illustrated chapter divided into 5 parts. It's called The Not So Quiet Adventure. During the 100th anniversary of Rockwell Kent's trip, 2018-2019, using this website, I followed Rockwell's travels across the country to Alaska and his stay on Fox Island day by day, week by week, using letters, journals, photographs, and other sources. I don't have the time here to talk about Rockwell Kent's early years, but it's important to understand that he and his first wife, Kathleen, were raised in late Victorian culture, now confronting a new world changing dramatically during the devastation of the Great War. This photo is 16-year-old Rockwell Kent's New York City in 1898 as he attended the Horace Mann School. Kathleen was 8 years old. The two changed with the times, of course, we all do. But we carry with us some baggage, good and bad, from our upbringing. This is Main Street in Seward, about the time Kent was visiting Alaska as it looked. On the webpage, I have many historical photos of Seward and the people he mentions in Wilderness. And by the way, publishers left out much local Seward material from the first edition of Wilderness. Kent restored a lot of that in the 1970 limited edition, which the reprint of that has my foreword in it. So if you want the local information, you need that edition. Seward sits at the top of the screen, which is north, at the head of a fjord called Resurrection Bay. Fox Island is the large island with 2 northwest-facing coves. He stayed in the northern cove. In November 1918, while on Fox Island, Rockwell drew this chart of Resurrection Bay. Behind me, you can see a copy of one of the originals. He sent his original to his friend Carl Zigrosa to reproduce. Kent's Cove is near the bottom of the screen. I haven't been able to locate many of these copies. The original, as far as I can determine, has been lost. I have one of the original copies behind me. My webpage includes history about Alaska, Seward, the construction of the Alaska Railroad, the Great War, the influenza epidemic. We can't ignore the influence all this had on Rockwell at the time. I summarize Rockwell Kent's life before Alaska and then follow him back to New York and Vermont and through some of the 1920s. Illustrations in this presentation come from the Archives of American Art, the Resurrection Bay Historical Society, the Rockwell Kent Collection at Plattsburgh, and I thank Rockwell and Kathleen's granddaughter, Kathleen, in the Bennington Museum, who sent me digital images of the Kent Whiting family photo album. You'll see some of those here too. Any of the scenics on Fox Island, I took those over many years. There's the webpage, and I'll put that up again at the end if you want to get access to it. American artist Rockwell Kent came to Alaska in 1918 at age 36 with his 8-year-old son, leaving his wife and 3 daughters behind. Between the end of August and March 1919, he lived on Fox Island in Resurrection Bay, about 12 sea miles from Seward. There he painted and kept an illustrated journal while he wrote and received many, many letters. This was no vacation, he wrote, but probably a last-ditch effort to gain success and earn a living with his art. In 1920, after 2 successful exhibits in New York City, he published Wilderness, a journal of quiet adventure in Alaska. His rapid fame blossomed during the Roaring '20s. By 1930, he was one of the most well-known artist adventurers in Alaska. On my website, there's a chapter called The Allure and Magnetism of Rockwell Kent. If you want to see my opinion of what attracted people to him, there was something about his character and personality, and I try to get into that in that chapter. Most of these stormy and passionate letters are between Kent and both his wife Kathleen and his current lover, or inamorata, Hildegard Hirsch, a New York City Ziegfeld's Follies dancer. Kathleen and Hildegard were about 8 years younger than Rockwell. They knew each other and were not happy with the arrangement. On the left, a stage photo of Hildegard, and on the right, her passport photo. Below is Rockwell's sketch of Hilda, along with some of the shows she did. Kathleen never forgot Rockwell's earlier love affair right after their marriage, and there would be more women after Fox Island until their divorce in 1926. The letters my wife Cindy and I transcribed from 7 months on Fox Island contained over 100,000 words. The letters we read but didn't fully transcribe probably included another 100,000 words. Now, here are what Rockwell's letters look like, and many of them are that long or even longer. They're written in small cursive, often lengthy, and they're on quality paper. That's important because Kathleen's were not. They're detailed, they're inspirational, they're demanding, they're ranting, they're depressing, and they're overly romantic, some of them. He could be a high maintenance friend and lover. Now, Kathleen's letters, on the other hand, are written on inexpensive, cheap paper, sometimes on onion skin paper with writing on both sides that bleed through. Some letters are damaged, almost unreadable. A few are almost blank. I think significant parts of this story may be lost unless we can get access to those damaged letters. To Rockwell Kent's letters, he would write about flying angels sending kisses to Kathleen. She responds about giving the girls a bath, household chores, the high cost of coal, and later with challenges to his infidelities and obtuse and unkind behavior toward her. She knows his weaknesses and sometimes torments him, feeding his jealousy. But these are the letters, not the book, though there are some clues in Wilderness. Kent's Alaska book is uplifting, inspiring, and healing. As I wrote in my foreword to the 1997 Wesleyan University Press reprint of the 1970 special edition, Wilderness is about art and life, childhood and old age, alienation and integration, simplicity and solitude. He calls it his quiet adventure, but within his letters lurks the unquiet adventure. Quote, "It is a frightening thought," psychotherapist Carl Jung wrote, "that man also has a shadow side to him, consisting not just of little weaknesses and foibles, but of a positively demonic dynamism. The Spanish call this duende." Note the title Weltschmerz on the bottom drawing. It's the German word for world weary or world pain. It's no accident that the last sentence in Wilderness, as Rockwell Kent leaves Fox Island for New York City, that last sentence is, "Ah, God, and now the world again." I'm focused on Rockwell's dark descent into that shadow after 10 years of marriage, and I'm determined to give Kathleen her voice in the Alaska experience. It isn't a pretty story, and I've no intention of making light of it. Schadenfreude, yes, we may experience some of that, but I'm not reducing Rockwell Kent to this difficult period of his life. He was a complex, gifted man of many moods and talents. Rockwell and Kathleen have left us a gift with these letters. I'm surprised they survived. They give us a significant insight into the creative and often tortured life of artists and of those who love them and choose to live with them. Beneath his enchanting Fox Island experience and the art and the book that emerged from it lurks the artist's uncertainty, anger, insecurity, depression, and loneliness. It's essential to grasp the advice of biographer and historian David McCullough, who warned his readers, nobody ever lived in the past, only in the present. And just like us, they didn't know how it would all turn out. We know the success of Rockwell's Fox Island work. But as we delve into this very difficult period of his life, we must realize that he has no idea where his life is going, no assurance of his artistic success, or a lasting marriage, no guarantee of his mistress's loyalty. He is extremely insecure, ambivalent at best, considering himself an abject, pathetic failure at worst. On the one hand, with resentment, he acknowledges his unappreciated genius, which deserves admiration and recognition and fame. Meanwhile, his demons consume his confidence as he demands faith, assurance, and loyalty of his brilliance from others, especially from Kathleen and Hildegard. He desperately needed these women. His third wife, Sally, wrote, "What is important to consider is that Rockwell Kent was an incurable romantic, and that his creative energies were heightened by the focus being in love gave to his work. He was that way to the end of his long and exceptional life. Nature, of course, in all its untamed and uncharted magnificence, was the great stimulus to his art, but one has only to look at the range of his artistic work to see how often the women in his life were subjects and beneficiaries of his creative genius." I would add subjects and beneficiaries, yes, but martyrs as well, especially Kathleen. Here's a photo of the fog rolling into Resurrection Bay taken from Fox Island. And you can see in one of Kent's paintings how he depicts that. When Rockwell refers in Wilderness to his confrontation with the abyss, what he calls the terror of emptiness, it's not some abstract philosophical concept a la Nietzsche, although he is reading Thus Spoke Zarathustra on the island. His prowling demons gift him that demonic dynamism described by Jung, the energy and perseverance to absorb his terrors, as well as wilderness energy, the north wind's power, the sea's supremacy, the sturdy, massive mountain grandeur with its enduring strength and immunity to life's petty trivialities. But he paid a price for this gift, as did Kathleen. After his death, and this is important, this was written after his death, his close friend, Carl Zieglerser, wrote, "I came to know and affectionately admire his three wives, Kathleen, Frances, and Sally. It is a commonplace observation that the wives of great men generally are unheralded and uncelebrated heroines. It is true of Rockwell's wives, even though he did voice his appreciation of them at times, not, however, at all times, and not with full understanding. He made great demands upon them. They must be wife, companion, household manager, hostess, amanuensis, secretary for voluminous correspondence. Brimming over with energy, he could and did wear out two wives. I salute all for their loyalty and unselfish devotion." You can see this, what Zieglerser writes, with the errands and tasks he asks both Kathleen and Hildegard to do for him while he's on Fox Island. Now, this is from Zieglerser's book, A World of Art and Museums, published in 1975. He was only willing to publish that after Rockwell's death. I won't speak for other scholars, but Rockwell Kent has certainly exhausted me at times. Kathleen Whiting's growth from a young, innocent 18-year-old Victorian woman who marries 26-year-old Rockwell Kent in 1908, how she eventually becomes self-assured, confident, and willing to confront her husband's infidelities and controlling nature. That is a fascinating story. He can't govern her from faraway Fox Island while she's living freely on Monhegan Island off the coast of Maine, and later in New York City. And that's the major reason he returns home from Alaska at the end of March 1919, despite the fact that Kathleen has obtained for him a patron who will finance his stay in Alaska through the summer. Rockwell misses Kathleen desperately, blames her instability in the state of her mind, not his, for his early return. He fears she will leave him and take the children. Rockwell's first visits Fox Island on August 28, 1918, and meets Lars Matt Olsen, the fox farmer and goat ranch caretaker. This is the weather he most likely experienced that day. I took this photo on August 28th, 2018, 100 years to the day that he first visited the island. Enthusiastic and motivated, he and Rocky move into an unused and filthy goat shed, and Rockwell prepares it for habitation. By October, he's ready to return home. His departure is firm by February 19th. He tells Kathleen he's written his sponsors about his return to New York in March. Quote, "I just said that you were pretty blue and lonely, and I didn't think I could leave you alone any longer. That's about as near the truth as I came to speaking of it. If you talk to my friends, he begs Kathleen, quote, I don't want you to tell them what you had written that brings me home. Do not let them think that I have failed in determination to carry out what I started. I'm very much ashamed of my failure and fear that my supporters will lose confidence in me. You know, I am homesick and I do long beyond thought to be with you. Don't tell anyone of my coming back. I don't want to see people. Kathleen responds, I will bear the blame. And if it gets too heavy for my shoulders, then not only in my letters, but in our life. This is the reason I think that my love for you is not as easy as yours is for me. It has suffered a relapse after these struggles. So let's unpack more of the emotional baggage Rockwell Kent brings to Alaska. About 1907, before he marries Kathleen, Rockwell begins a relationship with a young woman on Monhegan Island. He first meets Jane Bell Sterling, Jenny, when he comes to the island about 1903 at age 21. She's about 12 years old. In 1907, when she's 17 and he's 25, their relationship deepens and they become a couple. At this time, Rockwell probably has his first sexual experience. I discovered sex late, he wrote in his autobiography, and spent the rest of my life making up for lost time. In January 1908, while studying with artist Abbott Thayer in New Hampshire, Rockwell meets Thayer's 17-year-old niece, Kathleen Whiting. They fall in love, get engaged, and marry on December 31st, New Year's Eve. Kathleen becomes pregnant in early 1909. Rockwell revives his relationship with Jenny. Rockwell III, Rocky, is born in October. When Kathleen learns of Rockwell's affair with Jenny by checking his pants pockets, she is stunned and devastated. Rockwell is outraged that she would go so far as to sneak into his pockets and wants to know why she did such a thing. I know, you want to know what she found in his pockets. So do I. But Kathleen, we don't know, unfortunately. But in this extremely candid letter dated February 8th, 1911, Kathleen tells him why she would go so far as to sneak into his pants pockets, revealing much about their relationship. Dear Rockwell, you can never understand my feelings on the subject of you and Jenny. A woman's love is different from a man's, but you will not or cannot understand this. It is as though you and Jenny had plunged a knife into my heart 4 months after we were married. That wound is still there, and as far as I can see, always will be here, continually gnawing and by degrees eating up my spirits, my mind, and my heart. When I think this wound is healing, you plunge this knife in again and again, and each time it causes more pain than the time before. A change has come over me lately. My heart is no longer young as it was last summer when I longed so for the love that you have been able to give me only these last 2 months. You know, Rockwell, if you only stop to think how desperately unhappy all this has made me, it is that which has hardened my heart and made me into an old woman. When I think of this, I could almost kill you for it. Yet, I know that I really love you dearly, and my life would be absolutely blank without you. If this were not so, I would not have borne and still be bearing this unhappiness. I try to be the best wife I know how to be, and I hope will continue to be a good mother to your children, though you seem to have your doubts about that. You say that I have no faith in you. Well, I will say that I have not as much as I once had, but that is your own fault. You have made me many promises, which you have not kept and evidently never intended keeping when you made them. That is why I cannot trust you, and that is what made me look into your pockets. She takes the baby and leaves and goes to her family in Western Massachusetts. It hurts her to listen to her family condemn her husband, especially her mother's words. Kathleen appeals to Rockwell's good friend, her cousin, Gerald Thayer, to write to him. Gerald does and encourages his father, artist Abbott Thayer, to also write. Rockwell is furious and orders Kathleen to call off her, quote, bulldogs. Rockwell writes, you can choose between us. Stay in the pure, holy, and spotless sanctuary of Thayerdom, watched over by the immaculate flesh eater, the pure and lofty Abbott H. Thayer. Rockwell is an obstinate vegetarian. Or, he writes, come to this stinking den of vice and degeneracy, but don't bring any of that petty virtue with you. Eventually, Rockwell apologizes and promises to do better. Kathleen returns to him with the baby. He fails to keep his promises, begs for forgiveness, assures Kathleen of his love, guarantees faithfulness, and fails again and again. In 1910, Rockwell makes his first trip to Newfoundland to look into opening an art school there. Within a few months of each other, both Kathleen and Jenny learn they are pregnant. Jenny gives birth to Carl in July 1911. Kathleen has given birth to a daughter, also Kathleen, a few months earlier. She and Jenny continue to meet, correspond, and commiserate with each other. Rockwell wants them to all live together and get along. He has Jenny bring Carl for visits with Kathleen and the children. Neither women appreciate the arrangement. As Rockwell often said in later years, he wanted it all. The poet Shelley would agree with me, he tells the women, a reference to the free love philosophy of that period. At bottom right, little Rocky stands by his sister Kathleen and his brother Carl. On October 11th, 1911, Kathleen writes, "Rockwell, dear, you must leave me and go to Jenny. I can't ever be comfortable and happy with you, thinking how I am making her suffer. I can't be happy at the expense of someone else. If you absolutely refuse to do this for me, you must promise to let me sell my diamonds and economize in every possible way so that Jenny can keep Carl with her." Kathleen was always economizing to support their lifestyle. On October 13th, Rockwell writes, "I do realize how earnestly you mean all that you say, but darling, let me tell you this. I really do not believe I could live if death or anything separated us. When I actually look such a possibility in the face, it makes life seem terrible to me. Do not, unless you really want to ruin my life utterly, ever try to leave me. We'll take care of this together," he tells her. "You cannot help Jenny by driving me off." Rockwell turns over his trust fund to Jenny to care for Carl. The baby dies within a few months. Jenny marries a well-to-do doctor, and Kent files suit to get his money back since the money was meant for Carl's care. In 1913, Kent is in Winona, Minnesota, overseeing the construction of 2 mansions. He befriends a German family and is charmed by their little girl, whose name is Hildegard. Meanwhile, the court case against Jenny grinds on. Kent permanently moves his family to Newfoundland in 1914. They sell almost everything they own. His 3rd daughter is born there, and they name her Hildegard. Rockwell, as some of you know, was a Germanophile. As a child, he had an Austrian nanny named Rosa who taught him German. By now, the Great War is raging, and Zigrissa says he acted aggressively to the stupidity and prejudices of the natives. Rockwell wanders the Newfoundland coast with his paints and other supplies. The people suspect he's a German spy signaling submarines. So on his hut, he puts up a sign that says, "Private, chart room, wireless station, bomb shop." When he learns officials are reading his mail, he starts writing his letters in German. His pro-German comments, obtuse practical jokes, and unwise behavior in this former British colony results in he and his family's expulsion from Newfoundland. He was always standing up for principles, Zigrissa notes, and he loved a good fight. Keep in mind, all this is also part of Kathleen's life as well. The frequent moves, especially having sold most of her precious belongings for the Newfoundland move. Rockwell and Kathleen and the children returned to New York City destitute, dependent upon the kindness of family and friends. In this photo, Rockwell is holding little Hildegard, who was born in Newfoundland. Kathleen is holding Clara. Little Kathleen is leaning against Rocky as he sits. And by the way, in 1968, Newfoundland's premier discovered the correspondence related to Rockwell Kent's expulsion and invited him back. Rockwell returned for a little over a week as their guest, and they made up. His Newfoundland paintings get little attention. "Get back to painting your realistic seascapes," some critics warned him. In 1915, the court case against Jenny is finally settled. I believe he does get some money back. I haven't fully studied that court case. The next year, in 1916, he meets Ziegfeld Follies dancer Hildegard Hirsch, and begins a new affair. As with Jenny, he expects Kathleen and Hildegard to be one family. Neither women accept that, especially Kathleen, whose little daughter is also named Hildegard. Now, we don't have any of Hildegard's letters, but we can read between the lines of Rockwell's. She apparently expects an open relationship with him. He can have his wife, but she wants her freedom too. In a 1917 letter to her, Rockwell writes, I want you to have your ways and your freedom, but he adds that we should go about coquetting with different sets of friends is more than silly. It is a desecration of the heart of our love. She is a princess, he tells her, but a princess deserves most honor when she controls her pride and humbles herself. Quote, only when you are most proud and stubborn do I suspect you of being no real princess, my Hildegard, he writes. Quote, if you would only know how, when you are gentle, I love you. She isn't as easy to control as he requires. By June 1917, Rockwell's art career is going nowhere, and his romantic life is emotionally complicated. As his friend Carl Ziegerusser wrote, love entanglements often became Ken's incentive to escape into another adventure. Kathleen is still wounded with memories of the Jenny affair, the court case, and their disastrous Newfoundland experience. And now her husband plunges the knife in deeper with this new affair. Kathleen no doubt wants to change their little daughter's name. Rockwell doesn't. Kathleen writes, if you want all the love that I feel, you will have to hustle some to earn it now. This last affair has left a scar in my life that will not soon disappear. You cannot have the love I long to give you until you have shown me that I am not going to be chucked aside again in a short time. Rockwell to Kathleen, he writes, I'm seriously considering not painting anymore or drawing for a long time, but getting a job somewhere at some other work. Despondent, depressed, and caught between Kathleen and Hildegard, he's employed at an architectural firm in the city. He has suicidal thoughts. He is ripe for a new adventure, and Alaska is calling. But Kent is reluctant to go alone. He asks Hildegard to accompany him. She refuses. It seems he doesn't encourage Kathleen to join him. I thought you didn't want me to come, she later writes. In late July 1918, Rockwell leaves for Alaska with his son, Rocky. He writes in his autobiography that Kathleen reluctantly agreed to let him take his son. And that's the narrative that has survived, Rockwell's version. Kathleen's letters tell a different story. Before he leaves, Kathleen writes, no, you can't take Rocky. Kent responds, how in God's name can you turn upon me so? I'm heartbroken over it. I can't face the thought of the loneliness I'm going into. Kathleen responds, I wish you and Hilda would go, but leave Rocky with me. It seems strange to me to think you are taking him away from me without my consent, after my plainly stating I did not want him to go. Take Hildegard, she urges her husband, for I realize that she will always be a part of your life and that I must have a husband with a sweetheart or not have him at all. Rockwell and his son go to Montreal and take a train to Vancouver, then to Seattle to board a steamship to Alaska. He spends about 2 weeks in Yakutat working off and on at a cannery there. He decides to leave for Seldovia on the Kenai Peninsula. Along the way, the ship stops at Seward, where he observes the beauty of Resurrection Bay and its islands. Seward is also a mail transfer center for incoming and outgoing letters. That's important to him. He doesn't know that the steamship companies are having a contract dispute with the federal government, and the mail situation turns into a nightmare. Once on Fox Island, he receives some of Kathleen's letters and begins begging her to join him. Too expensive? And what about the children? She eventually responds. Anyway, you didn't really want me to come. All along the trip to Alaska, he's also been urging Hildegard to join him. You'll have to pay your own way, he tells her, but it'll be fun. She can cook, mend his socks, help Rocky row the dory to Seward and back. While awaiting answers, he fears both women may unexpectedly arrive together. He has nightmares. He advises Hildegard, if you decide to come, tell everyone you're my sister. Then he fears for her safety since she has a German accent. Meanwhile, Rockwell reluctantly registers for the draft in Seward. Hoping for a deferment, he asks Kathleen to send documents verifying he's married with 4 children. Patriotic fervor engulfs Seward as it does the nation. Slackers are not tolerated. American soldiers are dying in the Meuse-Argonne offensive in the last weeks of the Great War. Rockwell doesn't want a repeat of Newfoundland. Kathleen sends him the documents and lists her youngest daughter as Hildegard. It rains, and rains. Daylight hours decrease each day until winter's darkness arrives. Kent faces treacherous trips across Resurrection Bay in their leaky 18-foot dory with an unreliable 3.5 horsepower Evinrude engine. So he and Rocky row most of the time because the engine is always breaking down, sometimes in rough waters. They almost drown on one trip while rowing, nearly carried out to sea by a fierce north wind. That night a gale blows, Rockwell writes, and that night in bed, he and Rocky hold each other tight without saying why. Olson had warned him about the dangers of local waters, but the artist laughs it off, writing that these conditions wouldn't scare off a New England fisherman. He can handle small boats. He worked lobster fishing off the Maine coast, he assures Olson. But this near-death experience, vividly described in Wilderness, humbles him. As he writes to Kathleen, he doesn't care if he drowns, but Rocky's safety gives him nightmares. The darkness, the wind, rain, storms, rough seas, the war. Add to all this the influenza ravages Alaska and the country. Rockwell worries about his family's health back east. Kathleen tells of her concerns when the girls become ill. On one trip to Seward, he spends the night in a hotel, sick and afraid he's dying, wondering who will take care of Rocky. Quote, I lay there dreaming rather delusionally of death, planning my last instructions for the care of Rockwell and my last message to you, my darling, and our children. And I thought of ways to show you at my death how completely every hope centered in you. I called Rockwell once to sit by my bedside and pet me a little. The prevailing winds shift from south to north, and winter storms trap him on Fox Island. The north wind howls and fierce storms isolate him. From September, on September 19th, he writes to Kathleen, my first thought when I read your letter was that I could not now endure the loneliness that this island again gives me. Can you realize what it is to be one blow cut off from what is my exile here? Meanwhile, the steamship companies fight the federal government about mail contracts, and letters take weeks, months, going back and forth to and from the states. Some mail sacks get left on the docks in the rain. Letters are damaged or destroyed. Others never arrive. Rockwell has been waiting months for his canvases to arrive and paints on wood. There's no real communication between Rockwell and Kathleen. Kent finally gets his wife's October letters in late November. She holds nothing back. He's devastated. On October 14th, he responds, my darling wife, above all, I deserve to have lost your love. I am appalled at the thought of the unhappiness I have repeatedly given you. Oh, my darling wife, can you believe it of me that 100 times this past winter, I have been on my knees beside our bed or in some hidden place praying, to whom I do not know, but praying desperately for your happiness. Kathleen and the children are still on Monhegan Island. Her letters from there unhinge him. On September 12th, she writes, last evening I spent at the dance hall, dancing the whole evening with one man, a fellow by the name of Walker, whom I think I spoke of before, from one of the patrol boats. He came down to the house about 7. He's crazy about the kiddies, particularly with Kathleen, who entertained him for half an hour while I put the others to bed. He seems to feel that I am the only person on the island fit to speak to. It pleases me to think that he knows the difference, which most of them don't know and don't care about. Have as yet heard nothing from Hildegard. Loads of love to you, both from mother and wife. 2 days later, she writes, my friend Mr. Walker has just left. His boat is in again tonight, but it being Sunday, there was no dance. We took a walk and then came back here and lit a fire, dried our feet, and toasted marshmallows. We have just discovered that we are twins, born on the same day in the same year. Isn't that romantic? Good night. Hugs and kisses for you both. Your own Kathleen. She's sticking the knife in him and twisting it. These letters drive Kent insane with jealousy. He has nightmares. On December 1st, he writes, I have thought of destroying your last two letters, but I can't bring myself to do it. They have a morbid fascination for me. I read them again and again and study each phrase and try to extract some warmth of affection. They both violate all that you promised me. Her promise, by the way, was to always believe in and remain faithful to him. Rockwell can't tolerate these letters in the cabin, so he sends them back to Kathleen with this: "Oh, sweetheart, I do forgive you. Have more faith. Don't you half realize the depth of my despair these months on the island? Thank God for what wisdom I had in destroying the terrible letters I did write to you. Listen, darling, if you write me unkindly again, if you fail me in your love, be careful what you write me. Too much hangs upon it. So far, Alaska has been a tragic experience to me." December 31st, 1918, will be Rockwell and Kathleen's 10th wedding anniversary. In November, Rockwell writes two lengthy and revealing letters to his wife, admitting all his wrongs and promising he is now a changed man. He sends them to his good friend, Carl Zygrisser, asking him to deliver them to Kathleen on their anniversary with flowers and some special art he created for her. Kathleen will get them on New Year's Eve, and she responds that evening with joy and optimism about their relationship. "These are the most honest and sincere letters I've ever received from you," she tells him. She believes him, forgives him, and hopes for a new beginning. But he won't get those letters until mid-February. So all the letters he writes to her between New Year's Eve and mid-February don't respond to her optimism. And as Kathleen writes to him through January and mid-February, she doesn't know his responses to her New Year's Eve letters either. There is no communication between them. Meanwhile, the relationship between Hildegard and Kathleen becomes more toxic. Rockwell still writes to Hildegard, even though he has told Kathleen the relationship is over. Kathleen doesn't believe him. She has spies in New York. He learns from her friends that Hildegard has been cheating on Rockwell. She also discovers Rockwell has been addressing his letters to Hildegard to Mrs. Rockwell Kent. Kathleen is accusing her husband of spending hundreds, yes, hundreds of dollars on a piece of jewelry for Hilda, while she has been struggling to find money for eyeglasses for their daughter, Clara. You can observe on this letter Kathleen's anger and frustration emerging in her handwriting. She reminds Rockwell of an event that happened just before he left for Alaska. Quote, "Do you remember the scene we had in your studio when I went to you, determined to have things settled one way or the other? If you would not give her up, I said you would have to give me up. Hilda was crying and hanging on to you, crying, saying she could not give you up. You said you would not give her up and could not give me up. After a very heartbreaking and crying argument, and that's the way it ended, a deadlock, that was our last talk on the subject." Through late 1918, Kathleen still calls the baby Hildegard in her letters. Somewhere in the winter of 1919, while Kent is far away and unable to do anything about it, she starts calling the baby Barbara. So there we have it, the tip of the iceberg. Rockwell Kent was a meticulous perfectionist with high expectations, not only of himself, but also of his wives, children, and friends. The fact is, Carl Jung wrote, "If one tries beyond one's capacity to be perfect, the shadow descends into hell and becomes the devil." Before he left for Alaska, Kent asked his close friend, George Chappell, to take care of his family if something happened to him. On December 21st, Chappell writes, "I go down to see my foster family as often as I can. Their guardianship, should it ever be necessary, would be an honor. God grant that their dad may come back to them safely, but I shall always be on hand in any event. I lunch with the flock about once a week, and the daughters three hang about my neck like three great soft squashy plums. Last week, I translated from cover to cover the little French book with the amusing pictures of the animated furniture while the children waited with bated breath until the final tableau in which the old lady gets dead, as little Kathleen put it. It was great fun reading among a mass of chubby arms and legs." Chappell is about 14 years older than Kathleen and becomes a trusted mentor like an older protective brother. She writes to Rockwell admiringly about Chappell. Kent becomes jealous of their relationship. He's been writing to Chappell, complaining about Kathleen, asking Chappell to supervise her letter writing. Help her choose the right words. Convince her to write longer, more admiring letters expressing her faith in him. Kathleen is now in New York City with a network of friends besides Chapel and Zigrisser. They include Elizabeth, Bernie, and Bernice, and Polly and Fred. They help her with the children and treat her to the city nightlife, the theater, concerts, cabarets. Kathleen now wonders in letters about her life that might have been as a talented musician and pianist. Bernie and Bernice, their identity remains a mystery, but Polly is the wife of Frederick Dorr Steele. She calls him Fred, the famous American illustrator of Sherlock Holmes. Rockwell knew Steele and his wife from his early Mohegan Island years. Kathleen enjoys her fun evenings with these friends in her letters. Rockwell wants that behavior to stop. Convince her, he tells Chapel, to spend more time writing my letters and writing back. Rockwell expects his friend to assume control over Kathleen, the control that he can't from faraway Alaska. Knowing Kathleen and the children well, Chapel is one of Kent's dedicated friends who isn't hesitant to speak truth to ego. The first page and a half of his January 29th, 1919 letter is all praise and admiration for Rockwell. Only after that does he dare evenly criticize. Chapel writes, "It hurts me terribly to have you speak of Kathleen's faithlessness. It seems to me harsh and unfair when I see her at home giving unremitting care to the children, tied hand and foot with daily drudgery that would make a man into a maniac in a week, and always sweet, patient, always trying to do what she thinks is her duty. Oh, Rocky, perfection is always the peak beyond, and the way to it is full of bruises. But we can attain a kind of perfection by idealizing what we have and still not lose sight of the great unattainable. You have much to think of with most precious comfort, much to work for with great patience, much to come back to with supreme joy, if you will only surround them with greatness of heart, with forgiveness for shortcomings, with tenderness, and with unfailing love." Rockwell takes that to heart while isolated on Fox Island, determined to make changes in his life. He promises Kathleen that when he returns, together they'll travel rural New England, seeking a secluded spot to finally settle down, away from the city with all its temptations. Rockwell has sent her this idealized drawing of their new home. The letters from January through March 1919 tell us much about the couple. The two open up about their regrets and fears and dreams. There is still anger and disappointment, but with sincere attempts to understand each other. On January 13th, Kathleen writes, "It makes me sick and sore to think that I am nearly 30 and will grow old and die without ever having or doing so many, many things that I crave and have craved all my life." Rockwell responds with this sketch: "Your tragedy is the tragedy of all deep souls, of all who see life not merely as the little narrow path they tread, but a limitless plain. You have raised your eyes. You have seen how pitiful small is the little track you follow, and that is heartbreaking." Kathleen writes, "It makes me sore that I have been so good and patient and long suffering through my youth. People like that never get what they want in this life. For years, I really believed I would get my reward in heaven. Then I believed I would get my reward on earth. Now, I no longer believe in a reward, but feel sure I will die as I have lived, longing for things unattained. Don't begrudge any jolly times, dear. I must have them, or I shall get bitter." "There are no rewards," Rockwell responds. "There's just life." He adds, "Sweetheart, I have my hours of bitterness. I too could love society and forever gay in jolly times, and sport, my horse, tennis, the gay seashore, dancing, the attentions of women. I am still young and strong. I have brains and charm and confidence and sex attraction. I mourn the passing of these, but I have had to choose. I mourn the flight of years, the hair gone from my head, and the gray hairs on my temples. Would you have me forsake the choice I have made and be your companion in a life of play?" Rockwell's February letter February 13th letter continues. Kathleen, if you choose to go another way with you, if you choose that I go another way with you, that I abandon my ideals, earn a fat living for myself by prostitution, I will do that. But you must see then the light of my whole nature go out in failure. Be the best you can be, or you become nothing. If there's any man whose love you'd rather have than mine, and you have weighed well your choice and know the height and depth of his soul, then you are wrong to stay with me. Go, and I'll survive or not, or take me as worth more. And for all life sacrifices that you make for me as being, if not all happiness for you, at least the greatest that in your life's one lifetime you can know. On March 6, 1919, a few weeks before leaving Alaska, Kent pleads with his wife, put fences of thorns all about me, and I'll help you in building them. Take me into the wilderness and hide me from temptations. And even if I don't like it for my own sake, I'd go for yours. But above all, please, please, mother darling, try to be to me that complement to my wild and unstable nature, rightly or wrongly, requires. The couple purchased an old farmhouse near Arlington, Vermont. Rockwell calls it Egypt. Another son, Gordon, is born in 1920. Kent's rapid success takes him away often, back to the city, where, as his fame increases, so do the temptations. Rockwell brings his Fox Island friend, old Lars Olson, to Vermont, attempting to recreate his Fox Island Northern Paradise experience. It doesn't work. It never does. The old Swede becomes a parody of his true frontier character. Rockwell and Olson argue. The old broken down frontiersman, as he calls himself, departs and heads west. In the winter of 1922, Olson dies alone in a cabin near Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And by the way, there's a whole several part chapter on the life of Lars Olson on the website if you want to read it. He's a very important character, and Rockwell Kent knew that. That's why he told his stories in the wilderness. Next, an adventure to Tierra del Fuego, followed by a second illustrated book, Voyaging. The family spends time in France. Rockwell and Kathleen divorce in 1926. Kent marries again, Frances Lee, and spends time painting in Ireland. Kathleen sells their Vermont home, and a few years later, it succumbs to fire. Rockwell Kent's persona of invincibility, his friend Carl Ziegrusser observed, quote, carried him successfully through most of his life. Whatever he could not meet and overcome, he was very competitive, he would obliterate and act as if it had never existed. Had he lost his faith, his whole structure of his life would have crumbled, just like his cabin on Fox Island, obliterated. That's what he did with this negative Fox Island experience. He obliterated it. Rockwell never publicly acknowledged, as far as I can determine, the stormy details beneath his quiet adventure in Alaska. But his and Kathleen's letters reveal that story, though scholars have not adequately acknowledged Kathleen's role and her forceful voice echoing within the turbulent genesis of Rockwell Kent's book, Wilderness, a journal of quiet adventure in Alaska. And I just want to show you the webpage again here. And if you want to click on the access to the websites, you can do that. Otherwise, it's pretty easy to find. It's rockwellkentjournal.blogspot.com. I'll take any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Doug. Okay, let's open it up to the audience. Who's got a question? I will try and moderate right there. Okay, the question was, what was the straw that broke the camel's back? What was the main reason for the divorce?
Well, you know, as far I think I cover some of this on the website. It was relatively, you know, amiable as it could be. I mean, I think Kathleen knew that things weren't working out. As he was working on voyaging, he sent his family to France. He would occasionally join them. But I think she could see, as you can see, she's growing. She's not afraid to confront the situation. I think she could see that it didn't work out, all the things he had promised. You know, they're like New Year's Eve resolutions. He believed them in Alaska. But I think that was it. And I mean, I think Rockwell just was, remember this, he's really rising in fame during the 1920s. I mean, it's moving very, very quickly. To go from almost nothing in 1920 to being one of the best well-known American artists and adventurers in Alaska in one decade. You know, that's while Hemingway's becoming a popular writer in that decade, Fitzgerald's becoming a popular writer. So was the one cause? I don't think there was one cause. I think it's just the combination of everything.
Next question. Anybody out there? No, don't be shy now. Okay, we got one over here. Okay, Doug, do you think Rockwell Kent ever felt fulfilled as an artist?
Do I think he ever felt, well, you know, as a perfectionist, I think a lot of writers and artists never feel fulfilled. They never think they've done the best that they can do. Now, I don't know about Rockwell Kent. I assume that might be the case with him. Watch that 10-part series. It's in the Genius series on the National Geographic Channel. It's a 10-part series on Picasso. All Picasso's life, he was always trying to do that one picture, that one painting. And I love the way they end that series. He's in his bed dying, and he's having this dream. And we go to this dream and we see all the women that he had, all the children that he produced, all his friends, they're all gathered together. And I think the point they're making with that film is that his life, the life he created, was the great work of art. And I think that's with Rockwell Kent. To answer your question, I don't know. I suspect he never really did.
Doug, would you mind closing down the screen sharing so we can see a full screen of you with your answers?
Yeah, I'll do that.
It's the end share.
Okay, hold on. Got to try to get back on this.
And then we've got a question from the online viewers, the virtual audience. Is there any evidence of physical abuse with Kathleen or any lovers?
In the letters, there are some references to very severe arguments. But I don't think I've read anything about physical abuse. I'm trying to think. No, I don't think. I mean, they had some severe arguments that it's obvious, yelling and shouting and everything like that. But I don't think, to my knowledge, I haven't seen any evidence.
Well, that's good news. Okay, right here. Doug, did you get that? The question was, how has this impacted you personally, Doug, and your psyche, exploring these deeper stories, the ones under the surface that aren't documented or known?
Well, I think one of my important missions, I think it's very important. I wanted to get Kathleen's voice in this. And I hope we can eventually salvage some of those damaged or destroyed letters, because I think there's some more information there we may learn a lot more. So the importance, I think, the importance of the women in these artists and writers' life who have never gotten credit, which they're starting to get credit now with a lot of writers. That, and I think the most important thing that I have learned as a writer myself is perseverance. And although I'm not excusing Rockwell Kent for any of this behavior, on the other hand, I am commending him as an artist by the way he uses this negative energy to create his art. I mean, it's energy. Energy is energy, and the perseverance that he had. In fact, that one comment that he made near the end, where he says, "You look, if you can't be what you're going to be nothing." I mean, that's basically a suicidal note that you see among some artists and writers, that they're so determined, they're so obsessed with their career, they can't think of, in fact, they can't think of being anything else. In some letters, in later years, Rockwell Kent responded to letters from children and young adults who wanted to be artists. And one of the first answers he would always give to them is, so you want to be an artist? Don't. Okay. Don't become an artist, to tell them, unless there's nothing else in the world that you can do. So I think I've learned a lot about obsession. I mean, I must have some obsession. I've spent 40 years with this man, and he's exhausted me off and on. I had to take a break. After I did the website, I had to take a break and work on this book, The Last Homesteaders, to get away from him. Now I'm going back. So I don't know if I answered your question, but there it is. And I just want to say that this is a tragic love story, because it's clear that Rockwell and Kathleen loved each other. She loved him. He loved her. He loved his children. All right. Unfortunately, he also loved Hildegard. This is real love. Now, I think later in his life, it was a little bit different, particularly in the 20s, when he was philandering around a lot more. But these two early ones, particularly, he was in love with Kathleen. This is a tragic love story.
Thanks, Doug. We've got another question online here. Are there any plans for a new edition of Wilderness?
You mean, I don't think as far as I know, the 1997 Wesley University Press edition is not about a print. There was, and I should mention this, there is a Chinese edition that I wrote a foreword to that's now circulating in China. It's a reprint of the Wesleyan University Press edition, but I've heard no news of a new edition. But if you look, you go to the booksellers, particularly Amazon, and you'll see that there are 2 or 3 editions out of the first edition that have come out.
Right, and I will say, be careful purchasing on Amazon Wilderness, because it is in the public domain. There's some overseas sellers out there that are just reprinting the book in foreign countries and then putting them on Amazon. So definitely make sure you get one of the authentic copies of Wilderness. Another question from the audience. We got time for a couple more. Okay. The question was about the charts that Rockwell Kent designed and published on the inside cover of Wilderness, as well as a couple other of his books. What makes those so special, Doug, and kind of what are your thoughts of the charts?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is Robert Reitmeyer passed away just a few years ago, but he used to do a presentation on Rockwell Kent as a map maker, a chart maker. And I think that's just another one of the many skills that Rockwell had. And those of us who live in Seward and have been out in Resurrection Bay and know Resurrection Bay well, we know how beautiful and how accurate this map is. This just shows how he transferred his skills as an architect that he learned at Columbia. We see the fine hand of an architect in this, and how small. And you got to remember, he's doing this in November 1918 in his cabin, mostly at night, with artificial light, with candles and lanterns. So, I mean, it shows the tremendous skill that this man had.
Okay, we got time for a couple more coming in from online. And I think I know the answers to this, but I want to be sure myself. Doug, somebody was asking about the short biography of Olson. Am I correct to assume that can be found on your website?
Yes, when you get to the website, I've sent you to the right page, but if you get there, you click on it. There's a notice that says a table of contents. click on the table of contents and you'll see there's a 10-part series on Olson. Kent, listening to his stories, I think Kent realized how important he was to history. Olson in the 1880s is working in the Klondike area and in the Yukon Territory with some of the early Canadian prospectors. And I've uncovered a lot more information about that. I mean, he is one of the very early prospectors up in that area.
Thanks. Okay. And I do apologize if we didn't get a chance to get to your question. Of course, all of us Rockwell Kent lovers are happy to talk about Rockwell Kent. So feel free to reach out to any of us. But I do have one final question from a virtual attendee. The question is, Doug, what is your favorite Alaska piece? Not just paintings, any piece of art created from the Alaskan adventure?
Well, I mean, I think some of them are the beautiful ones, like Alaska Winter, which is at the Anchorage Museum of History and Art, is one of my favorites. But I like the chart. I can't give you one. The ones he does of Bear Glacier. Oh, I know. I'll tell you if I have to pick a favorite one. This is one, as Scott will tell you, is in the Soviet Union. But as a picture he took he took a photograph of it too that I have found. It's from one of the mountaintops on Fox Island where he looks east across the El Dorado Narrows on the other side of Fox Island. And he shows what we call the Fox Island Spit. There's a spit of land that comes out into the El Dorado Narrows. I mean, if Scott's there, Scott can tell you what the name of that is. I can't think of the name of it. He'll tell you about that painting. That's one of my favorites because that is so realistic. I mean, most of the mountains he does, some of the mountains he does in his Alaska paintings from Fox Island, they have pointy tips and they don't look like the real mountains. But some are very realistic. The early ones he does on wood are realistic. What he calls the studies. And that one that he does from across looking eastward to the Fox Island Spit. Scott Ferris will tell you the name of that one. He knows what I mean. We've talked about that recently.
All right. Well, everybody, let's give Doug a big hand for sharing his vast knowledge. Thank you so much, Doug.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to get off here now because I got to get on to Claudia's now. Okay, thank you.
All right, we're of course going to take a 30-minute break, and please join us.